Good morning, everyone. Today is the 27th of August, Sunday morning. Mark is reading through the Doctrine of Election by Arthur Pink. He's in Chapter 7, and it's on Part 7. If you guys would like to get a copy of this book, you can go to greatchristianbooks.com and order yourself a copy.
Doctrine of Election, Chapter 7, Part 7. There is something yet more precious here in 1 Peter 5:10. The God of all grace, which is referenced first to exceeding riches of grace, or in his nature, then for benevolent designs which he has toward his own, and then to his gracious dealings with them. The grace of his nature is the fountain. Grace is purpose to counsel, says the wellhead, and the grace in his dispensation for dealings with us are the streams. God is in all hath gracious God himself, even as he is the Almighty, which is an essential attribute. There is a limitless ocean of grace in himself to feed all streams of which his purposes and designs of grace. The nature of God is in the promise. This is grace to feed all streams of which his purposes designs grace for Christian forward. Even as he is Almighty, which is an essential attribute. Our consolation and hence is that all the grace which is in the great nature of God is in the promise of his being the God of all grace. To his church declared to be so, that gazeth to afford supplies unto them, yea, the utmost expenditure of these riches as their needs shall require. Nor is God known to be such only by his people in the New Testament era. David, who is the greatest subject as well, is the door to this grace. And that we find the Old Testament apprehended and acknowledged the saying, according to thine own heart hast thou done all this greatness, and make me know all these great things. 1 Timothy, 1 Chronicles 17:19. And mark what immediately follows, O Lord, there is none like thee, neither is there any God beside thee, that is thou art the God of all grace, for the appointed grace, high grace, David is there bestowing, namely God's covenant grace. And him in Christ is revealed to him. What can David say more? Verse 18, such divine favor is beyond him, such as Paul in Romans 8:3-1. What shall we then say to these things? That when God pardons, he does so after the manner of a great God, full of all grace and abundantly pardon. Isaiah 55:7, not according to our thoughts, saith he, verse 8, but according to his own. That which the old divines referred when they spoke of God's purpose and grace. His ocean thereof, in his own nature, from which flow those beneficial designs which he had toward his people, designs which the prophet described as thoughts of peace. Jeremiah 49:11, which he took up unto them the rescue thanks toward them. It would be impossible to speak of all these thoughts. For David declares, many, O Lord my God, thy wonderful works which thou hast done. And thy thoughts which are to us were, they cannot be reckoned up and ordered. Psalms 45:5. Psalm 45. And this can summarize. Then we dwell only on this verse, which directly serves to the point for us, namely our preservation on for God carrying us safely through all temptations and everlasting glory. 1 Peter 5:10 manifestly speaks of God's purpose and grace, of God and the grace which was in his heart towards people before he calls them, which in fact had called received and was moved him thereunto, as it expressly affirmed in 2 Timothy 1:9. The first act of his purpose and grace was in his choosing of us, but singling out of those persons whom is designed to be a God of grace unto his choice of the person is styled election grace. Romans 11:5. Being the fundamental act of grace upon which all others are built. To be a God of grace and his church is to love its members merely because he chose to love them for grace is the credence of love. Receive us graciously as a prayer of the church. Isaiah 14:2. I will love them greatly. Verse 4. The Lord's response: divine grace and human merits star apart as the poles, as Romans 11:6 shows them one mutually exclusive together. For God to be the God of all grace unto his people is for him to resolve to love them, and that forever to be unchanging in his love, and never to have his heart taken off them. Superbly denoted in the language of 1 Peter 5:10, for he called us unto his own glory. It's not simply that he has called us in grace and favor, then the glory and that internal glory that is by perpetual call, he states us as a whole and full right. Thereof forever, what can this mean but that God called us out of such grace and love as he did, and thus resolved to be the God of all grace to us for everlasting, therefore calls us beyond the call, Romans 11:49. This is clearly born out of by which about what immediately follows after that ye have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, settle you. This grace thus fixed in the divine will is the most sovereign, predominating principle in the heart of God, overruling all other things. He willeth so as to effectually carry on and carry out his resolution of free grace. Grace is the most resolute, so is the most absolute principle in the heart of God. For unto it belongeth about dominion, what else means throne of grace, Hebrews 4:16. Why else is grace said to reign unto eternal life, Romans 5:21. Same thing appears in the context of 1 Peter 5:10, humble yourself and submit to, therefore, the mighty hand of God, that is to the sovereign power, that he may exalt you in due time. Verse 6, he careth for you. Verse 7, all of which is carried down to God of all grace. And verse 10, which is followed by to him the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Verse 11, that is to him is the God of all grace. It is the God of all grace by way of institution performance, and we must now contemplate him. His grace and dispensations of all sorts, with his affection, oaths, and graces, nature and the purpose of grace in his heart. When we turn back for a moment, 1 Peter 5:5. God gives grace to humble, which prefers to act for stumbling grace. In like manner, James declares he gives more grace, 4:6, where he quotes the same passage as Peter's. And James, it is spoken of in reference to subduing his people's lusts, particularly lust and envy. True, this is grace indeed, that when lust is raised, the grace of God shall move him. He can give more grace, whereby he subdueth other them that humble themselves from his lust, and gives more grace.
Thank you, Mark. Well, have a good weekend, and we'll plan on seeing you tomorrow, the good Lord being in the matter.